Hello everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of the Read Right to Left podcast. I am, as always, G from Simply G, joined by my always wonderful co-host, Ray from Whimsical Pictures.
Hello everyone.
And this month, very exciting, we are joined by our very wonderful guest, Tails.
Hi,
who
everyone.
is a long-time listener of the podcast.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yes, and very graciously joined us for our discussion on this month's topic, Land of the Lustrous.
So yeah, hello. As G already said, I'm Tails, and I'm so glad to be on here today to talk about one of my favorite manga, Land of the Lustrous. So yeah, looking forward to an awesome discussion.
We are very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for putting yourself forward for this. For those who are not aware, Land of the Lustrous is an ongoing seinen manga from Haruko Ichikawa. Currently 12 volumes in Japanese?
12, I think.
12.
Yeah.
12.
It's 12.
With 10 volumes in English as of right now. It's currently being put out in English by Kodansha, and it is that release that we are going to be talking about in this podcast. I don't think any of us... Well, we're going to talk about the series as a whole, but generally we're going to be talking about events that occur within the volumes 1 to 10 rather than future stuff that may be in volumes 11 and 12, because I don't think any of us have read that stuff.
Yeah. With this series, every volume is a huge turning point, so, bear with us.
Yes. So Land of the Lustrous was a series that I was vaguely familiar with. I had seen people in the manga buying, collecting community by the not anyone who's really that active in the community anymore, but I had seen people buy the Japanese volumes and speak very highly of the series. The covers were very beautiful, and so it was when the manga got licensed, I was aware of it, and so decided to start it as soon as it had been released in English, which was very quickly followed by the anime, which is also available in English, and just absolutely fell in love. It was something that I knew that I would probably enjoy, not only because I am biased to all things earth science related, despite being a relatively small aspect of what this story is really about, but it kind of grabbed my attention, and in a very nerdy way, had a lot of referential things that I thought were pretty funny, like geology jokes. Anyway, that's a me problem. But
rock jokes.
Exactly.
Yeah, this series is about rock people, but G is also a rock person of a different sort.
The most rockiest of people. Yes, yeah. And I very quickly fell in love with it. I thought that the characters were really interesting. I thought the setting was immensely well done, and it's very compelling right from the get-go. The atmosphere is beautiful. The art style is phenomenal. I love Ichikawa's work, and so it quickly became one of my most highly anticipated series. Even now, as soon as the new volume comes out, as soon as I get it, I try to sit down and read it, because it's just that good. And the ride has been crazy. It's been a wild time.
Yeah.
But what about yourself, Tails? How did you get into this series?
I think it was because of the animation and people were talking about the new technology the anime used. So because the anime was first for me, and then I went on to read the manga because I wanted to see where the story was headed. So I was just impressed by the so well done animation, and of course, as a non-binary person, sorry, you always search for media where you could be represented. So I thought that the aspect of the genderless gems and how the show would handle it always, sounded very, very appealing to me. So yeah. I was just blown away by how they fused 3D animation technology with 2D and how they had rigged 3D models, but they still used 2D for the faces. So it just looks phenomenal. Yeah, so... And the manga, of course, too. Like, I think the anime might be a perfect adaptation, but... the manga in its own right is just phenomenal. Ichikawa is such a phenomenal artist, so it's a very captivating series.
This was Studio Orange that made the anime, right? Yeah, I honestly think they picked like a perfect manga to start like experimenting. It's a very experimental manga, and just the fact that all the characters are minerals, I think, lends itself well to CG and gave them an opportunity to really play around with like the refraction patterns and everything. The style of the backgrounds as well in the manga is very experimental, which I think ended up looking really good in animation as well. But for me, I'm kind of the same as G. I definitely remember like seeing people sharing around like pages and especially the covers and being like, oh, I want this to be licensed, look at how beautiful the covers are. So then when it was announced for license, I was like, oh, I've heard good things about this and it looked really beautiful. And then like seeing people talk about it, it's like, I picked up volume 1 and I was reading it. And, big Motohagio nut that I am, I was like, the paneling here kind of reminds me of, like, Year 24 manga, so
True.
That made me really excited. So I kept going, and now I'm here. Yep. That's about it. And then I watched the anime, which was helpful, because it is hard to tell the characters apart, but I feel like rereading it after having seen the anime, I found it so much easier to tell everyone apart because I was thinking of like what color they were in my head.
See, this is where the geology knowledge helps you, because you know what those minerals look like.
No, I'm the wrong kind of nerd. I feel like there was a lot of buzz about it when it first came out, but I don't... Like, I hear certain people talking about it, and then most people just not. And that makes me a little sad, so... But I guess if you read Volume 1, you have no idea how wild it's gonna get.
Yeah, it's certainly a series that has changed and continuously evolved and built on top of itself the more you get into it. And I think the first volume on its own, comparatively to what it's adapting, the first couple episodes of the anime are kind of like lull you into this false idea of what the series is about.
A false sense of security.
Yes. And it isn't until we start to see the cracks literally starting to show with stuff like the snail and Phos's trip to the ocean, or in the ocean, and the whole winter arc and things like that, that we really see what the series is attempting to do and the topics it's discussing.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess, should we give a brief overview of what happens in the series? What
Sure.
it's about?
Yep.
We've hinted at it, but this is a series about rock people. They're all gemstones. So the main character is named Phosphophyllite. There's diamond. There's cinnabar. There's there's so many. Ghost quartz and amethyst. Like
Jade.
every mineral you could think. Jade. Yeah. Alexandrite. I mean, there's a lot of characters. But basically, they live on the last remaining beach, the last remaining strip of land on the Earth after thousands and thousands of years after humanity has died out. And the Earth has been hit by tons of asteroids, so now there's 6 moons, and it's mostly ocean. And all life has pretty much broken down, so it's all, like, very small organisms and microbes, mostly. And the gems themselves are made up of microorganisms sort of piecing together and fusing, with minerals. And sort of forming into this symbiotic macroorganism. But on this strip of land, there's a school with this Buddhist priest-looking guy who is referred to as sensei, and all of the gems who they do all kinds of stuff, but mostly they keep getting attacked by moon people, who are these terrifying alien monsters from the moon, with a Buddhist theme, and they are trying to steal the gem people away, presumably to use as decoration. So the gems have to fight in pairs to keep the moon people from taking their friends. And Phosphophyllite hasn't really found a purpose because they are very... their hardness is very low. So basically, if you breathe the wrong way on them, they fall apart.
Their moss hardness is at a 2, which in geological reference frame is that you can scratch that thing, you can scratch that mineral with a fingernail, and it will break apart.
I think they're a 3.5.
Oh, 3.5?
Cinnabar's a 2. Yeah, because they're called, like, Sanhan in the anime. Everyone calls them Sanhan. 3.5.
Okay, then 3.5 is you can scratch with coin, and... Yeah. Scratch with the
Well, that's still
coin.
pretty pathetic, so...
Oh, it is, and especially comparatively to all the other gems who have the most
all the diamond family.
Yeah, of much, much higher. Phos would just immediately break down if impacted by any of them.
Yeah. But they're a funny character. They've got this huge ego that, like, is not at all, like, justified by anything they've ever accomplished. Which, you go. But they really want a job. They want to fight, is what they want to do, but instead Sensei gives them the job of writing a natural history of their species and their little strip of land, and they are not happy about that. But that's where our series starts, and it goes from there. So we've got the mystery of the moon people, we've got the mystery of Sensei, and we've got this natural history that Phos is ostensibly supposed to be working on.
And I think there's a great point to that, in that the Phos wants to be a fighter, wants to be a warrior, like literally all of the rest of the gems except for rutile and alexandrite. who have their own reasons for the jobs that they do, and Dark-Dite. And Cinnabar, Cinnabar's
a warrior, but they're at night.
Yeah.
But I guess that is the first character where, like, Phos kind of finds a bit of a kindred spirit in. Mm-hmm. Because Phos feels very much like an outcast because they feel like there's no job that they're going to be good at. And Cinnabar is kind of in a similar position. Angsty little bean. Cinnabar, like, exudes this... They just call it a venom, but presumably it's mercury.
It is. Cinnabar is just another word for mercury. It's just a different name for it.
Which is why they're so soft. But, that's, but I mean, like, in the manga, they just call it a poison or a venom. Mm-hmm. That is very dangerous to the gems if they get coated in it. So they have basically given themselves the job of night patrol. And they spend all of their time alone, and they sleep during the day, and they're up at night. And, you know, they would really like to have a job where they can be with all of the other gems, but they haven't found one. So they're just always alone. Mm-hmm. So Phos is like, you know what? I'm going to find you a job. And Cinnabar blushes bright red, which is very confusing. Because there are
Beauty power.
Beauty power. Okay, yeah. None of these characters have any concept of gender, but, like, the Yuri vibes early on are strong.
Yeah.
We've got this school with all of these beautiful little people who always fight in pairs, and, like, the Yuri vibes are strong. Yeah. But yeah, that's the series, and it really does change a lot from there as we get into what the moon people are, and what's in the ocean, what the gems are, what sensei is. And Phos, as they uncover all of this, they change with it, and they are having a time, and they have been having a time for a long time now. Literal hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thousands even.
Mm-hmm. Geological time frame. That's nothing when it comes to rocks, but
these are rocks with feelings.
But I do have one question. It's never actually explained how long a year in their world takes compared to ours. So it could be shorter or even longer than we might assume. Because the series never explains that. Okay, 1 year in Gemland is like, I don't know, 2 years in our on Earth or something.
Which is definitely a possibility with the world having been, the world being in thousands of years future from current, and with all of the meteorological activity
6 times as many moons.
Yes. And you presume that they follow the seasonal schedule, but again, we don't know. We don't know how often that is, how quickly, or really, like, is the winter season, or is it ice ages? Like, we don't know. That could be the whole different time frame.
Yeah.
Basically, it's an Earth that is completely alien from what we know now.
Yeah.
Is kind of the idea. That, and I think just the emotionality behind, like, you know, for example, like, the reveals of, like, when Phos was in a coma, and, you know, Karen is like, I've been doing winter duty for 102 years. It's like, I don't know, there's something to that to me that fits into the series themes of, like, trauma and grief, where it's like just the sheer length of that just makes you go, oh my god.
Yeah. Well, it's a similar role that Phos was in after Antarctite, and what happened to them and their trauma, their grief from that, and also the whole part of Antarctite and their the fact that they exist is kind of a surprise. Like, that gem wouldn't have ever been discovered outside of winter just because of its physical properties. And so there's something to be said about how the gems, and this obviously is from the very beginning something that Phos struggles with, that idea of like something you can do or something only you can do, having a role for every person, and not every person can do every role. It's and again, like, that's something that Phos has had to change with, and very physically, literally change over the course of the series.
Yeah, so I guess we can talk about that as the first major turning point in the series, is the winter arc. So we have this setting where, Phos is kind of this bumbling, overconfident idiot who, like, is they've been trying to, put together this natural history. And they go around to all the different gems, like, help me with my natural history. And they're like, no, do it yourself. And then rinse and repeat. But the first major turning point in the series comes with the winter season. And the gems in this series, the microorganisms that make them up, feed on sunlight. So during the winter, which is very cold and dark in this future world, they are very sleepy and they basically hibernate through the winter. With the exception of Antarcticite, who is liquid for most of the year, and only when the temperature gets colder do they crystallize. So they do all of the patrol duties during the winter. I guess I have to talk about ventricosis first, huh? Oh my god, so much happens in this series.
Well, the initial
Don't just leave it to me.
The initial thing is that Phos is doing their natural history, is looking for a job that Cinnabar can do. Because, again, as you mentioned, Ray, they are very much kindred spirits. They both feel a little bit out of place compared to their fellow gems and the work that they're doing. But amidst trying to shirk the natural history duties, Phos goes through or discovers this weird little sea slug creature, which is able to talk to them. And everyone thinks that Phos is going crazy.
Yeah.
And do they get eaten first? Yeah.
They get eaten, and then they integrate some of the shell stuff because they were eaten.
Well, they're calcified into the shell.
Yeah. And then they, are recovered from the shell, and after that, suddenly they can talk to the slug, and everyone thinks they're crazy.
But the slug is representative, or the slug throughout the course of this period of the manga becomes sort of a opportunity of information for Phos. The slug provides information to Phos about the reality of the world, about gems' existence, and their relationship with the Lunarians, and the relationship with the stuff that lives in the ocean, and how all of them are interconnected in a way that prior to this, the gems just really didn't have any idea about, and has been very purposefully hidden from them for a very, 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 very long time, if not the entirety of their existence. So
yeah,
it opens up Phos's curiosity to kind of figuring out what the purpose is for their existence, but also their existence in relation to these Lunarian attacks and to this other race that used to live in the ocean. And then, while struggling with that, we have the change of the seasons.
Yeah. So the slug basically lures Phos into the ocean, saying, I want to go home, and maybe if you come with me, like, you'll discover something for your natural history thing. And when they get deep enough in the ocean, this slug transforms into a very humanoid sea creature, and reveals that she is the queen of the Admirabilis, is what they're called, the shell people, who live in the ocean and on the moon. She's, like, the only explicitly gendered character, her and her brother, because the Admirabilis, basically, in the history that she tells Phos, the three races of the Admirabilis, the Gems, the Lustrous, and the Lunarians, are basically three aspects of humanity. The Gems are the bones, the Admirabilis are the flesh, and the Lunarians are the spirit, metaphorically or whatever. So the Admirabilis are the only ones of the three who are sexually dimorphic and reproduce. They also are the only ones who die. And Phos is very confused by all of this, because this is totally alien to them. But during this encounter, Phos also ends up losing their legs, and this is the first major physical change for them, where they have to integrate agate, I believe, and some of the shell from the Admirabilis into their legs. It turns out that their microbes that are in their body are very flexible and willing to take on a lot of different new materials. Dun dun dun! And so now they have new legs, which are very fast and very powerful, a lot harder than the rest of their body. And
gold inclusions.
You know. Yeah. Did they get the gold
yet?
No,
or later.
Is that just the arms? The agate is, like, super fast, and the shell. And that is... They suddenly can run really fast and jump really high. So they're like, Sensei, can I fight now? Please, can I fight now, Sensei? And Sensei's like, whatever, you can hang out with the Amethyst twins. Go bother them for a while.
I was going to just say another geology joke, because amethyst is known for its twinning, where two crystals grow from a singular point, which is why the amethysts are twins. Sorry. Anyway.
Yes.
Nerd.
Also, they can, like, all of the gems, if they run into each other, they shatter each other, except for the amethyst twins, where if they clunk together, they, like, are totally fine because they're twinned. So
they're identical hardness and they're identical cleavage planes, so they don't break when contacting each other.
But the funny part is that they like to make everybody super uncomfortable by just, like, bonking their heads together really hard.
Weird flex, weird flex.
Which is what I would do too. And then we get to the winter arc.
Yes.
Their foes.
So much happened. This is volume 3, people.
Yeah. So it doesn't actually take a long time for the series to start introducing a lot of its more, I guess, non-literal story elements and more contemplative themes. There's
speculative elements.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that, as we mentioned early on, if you were just someone who'd watched the first couple episodes or just read the first volume, I think the impression you get from that, even from volume 1 to volume 2, is very different. But it all evolves in a very natural way, and Phos, as the youngest of the gems at the beginning of the series, is the one who's also trying to catch up with everyone else, is sort of finding their place amongst their peers. So we as readers are learning along with them about how this whole world works. I think Phos is only 300 at the beginning of the story.
200, 300, something like that. Yeah.
Which is very, very young when it comes to the rest of them.
So, because everything's so complicated, I don't want to, explain the entire story, but I do want to explain the winter arc, because it sets up a lot of the major themes of the series, I feel like. Yeah, so like I said, the gems hibernate in the winter, and Antarcticite is the only one who patrols during the winter. And they have a very, only child relationship with Sensei that's kind of cute. But this time, Phos is having trouble sleeping with all of these questions swimming around in their head about Sensei and why Sensei is keeping so much from them, and the Admirabilis and their new legs. So they're like, hey, could I, do the winter patrol with Antarcticite? And so they spend the winter doing that. But during that winter, basically, Phos, they're attacked by the Lunarians, and Phos loses their arms. And a strange gold, I think it's gold and titanium alloy, fuses to their shoulder sockets and just starts going absolutely crazy. And they are left helpless while Antarcticite is shattered and taken to the moon. And of course, Phos blames themselves. Loki was kind of Phos's fault, so.
Yeah, I mean, Phos was goofing around like always, and then sticking their arms into the water, and suddenly they were gone, and Antarcticite tried to find new material. So yeah, Phos is kind of responsible.
Yeah. Hate to say it, but they feel a lot of guilt about that, and a lot of survivor's guilt. And their personality goes through its first major change, and they're a lot more serious, a lot more aloof, and kind of not joking around at all. They're just like, okay, we just gotta get this done. They don't really care about fighting anymore because they know what fighting actually looks like. And they're a lot stronger because their gold alloy on their arms can morph into shapes, so they end up developing their own fighting style using it, which is very beautifully drawn. but they've got this big amorphous blob that appears from their arms, mostly. So, yeah, that's the first sort of, I guess, glimpse into what the series is going to be like, in my opinion.
So, with that, we already touched on quite a few of the themes, especially there's a real thick thick line of this being a part of something larger, and the interaction between Phos and the rest of the Lustrous, and why the Lunarians are so adamant on attacking them, and then also why the people of the ocean that what are they called, the Amadrillis something,
Admirabilis,
and
yes.
their differentiations, and how they all represent a part of the human body, or what humanity is, and the differences in them, the similarities in them, and how they kind of have to coexist but can't. When they are separate, there's so much need to be complete again. And that's something that's seen very much so physically in Phos, in their physical changes as a gem, in having bits and pieces replaced over the course of the series, very physically changing in a way that the other gems really aren't. The only one who somewhat has a similar experience is another gem called Padparadscha, which has holes in their body, which means that they're not awake for a very functional period of time. They kind of are in this continuous sleep, and their body doesn't have the same adaptability that Phos does. So Rutile, who is the doctor of the piece, has dedicated a lot of their time in finding just stray minerals and bits and bobs to fit into those spaces to try and wake their partner up.
Yeah, there's a lot that's interesting about sort of the triad that it forms between the body and, they say, I guess, the bones or the skeleton, but I kind of see it more as like mind a little bit, and then the soul of body, mind, and soul. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's just the ways that they're different is very interesting. Did you want to add anything about that, Tails?
No, I agree with everything you say. Like, I just wanted to mention that Padparadscha actually was born with holes, and that Phos just goofs around a lot and loses body parts in our time that need to be replaced. So, yeah.
Phos is just unfortunate. Honestly, at their current state, Padparadscha is also not doing great, so... they are awake most of the time now.
Yeah.
Right.
But they'd probably rather not be.
But it's interesting, like, when it comes to Padparadscha, because Padparadscha is known for this amazing, long, really long hair that contains a ton of gem, and for some reason they cannot, I don't know, stuff their holes with the gem material of the hair. I don't know, for me it's like a big plot hole for some reason, because they repair the other gems sometimes with their hair, like what happens to Borts, what happens to yeah, and Phos, like, they sometimes take away the hair and to glue up or repair the cracks. So I always thought that was quite interesting why they couldn't do that with Patparacha. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess their inclusions just don't like those parts of their bodies. But it is interesting that we see so many gems that are supposed to be these perfect ageless beings, but that are born with very fundamental, debilitating, essentially, defects, like Padparaja and their holes, or ghost quartz having another gem inside them, or obviously Cinnabar and their venom. I think that's quite interesting. And of course they don't reproduce or evolve, so the way that they are is just kind of the way that they are. Not all of them can change like Phos can. So there is kind of an interesting dynamic between change for the good and change for the bad, I think. I also think it's kind of interesting in terms of, I'm sure we'll get into like the gender role stuff a little later, but in terms of the triad, like I said before, the Admirabilis are the only ones who are sexually dimorphic and sexually reproduce. The gems have no concept of gender or sexuality. They make some jokes, I think, but I don't count it that much because Ichikawa has kind of a weird sense of humor. But it seems to be, they never really understand what they're saying when they talk about, like, diamond-loving love stories. They seem to have just read about it in books. They don't really have any understanding of what any of it actually means. And the Lunarians, when we finally meet them, they don't seem to have any kind of physical sexual characteristics. It's kind of like in the same way that the gems are meant to be. This is from an interview with Haruko Ichikawa, but Ichikawa says that she draws them with the idea of someone who is male on the top and female on the bottom, which, whatever. The Lunarians are drawn that same very androgynous kind of way, but they seem to have some concept of gender identity and sexuality. Certainly sexuality. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that was my...
Yeah, I mean, especially when we see the quote-unquote prince who is trying to have a wedding. And... right.
We can get into that stuff if
you want. It's a different story.
So, there's a character named Ghost Quartz who runs the library. And they have another gem living inside of them, which is what Ghost Quartz is, so that makes sense. But all of Ghost Quartz ends up getting stripped away, leaving just the gem inside them left. And that gem is a pitch black gem named Cairngorm. And they are the character I am the second most worried about after Phos.
Yeah. Right.
Ghost Quartz was partnered with Phos and was very fond of them. Cairngorm
not so much.
Blames Phos for Ghost Quartz being taken to the moon, which, again, extremely fair. My child, Phosphophyllite, has made a lot of mistakes in her life. Eventually, Phos decides that they, in order to uncover all of the things that are being intentionally hidden from them, they have no choice but to go to the moon and see the Lunarians and their homeworld for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up, well, they go and they meet the prince of the Lunarians, who is referred to in the same sort of way that all the other gems are, which in Japanese they actually use masculine third-person pronouns, he, him. So they went with singular they, them in English, but I might have kept it as he, him for that particular character. But I understand why they went with they, them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's complicated. Japanese is complicated. Their, sexlessness is basically shown in Japanese through the way that they talk about themselves. Each character kind of uses mostly masculine personal pronouns, but there's also feminine pronouns depending on the character and how they see themselves. And they use a mix of feminine and masculine speech patterns, which are not easy to replicate in English. You read it in German, didn't you, Tails? What do they...
Well, I could go... So, you could do an entire episode on this, I think, because German is way more complicated than English. And so you might have in English an official or kind of official, they as a pronoun for non-binary people or anyone who wants to use it, is pretty common or well established, but in German there's just no official version for that. So the translator, who is a feminist, and Verena Masa, actually, she tried to she tried to find some way to convey how the gems are genderless. So she used pronouns like xia, and it's stuff. Before I read the manga, I'm honest, I've never heard about this, and she's trying to explain it in the back. So, but as for now, there's just no official way in German to go about this at all. And it's very hard, and German is also a very gendered language. So when you state your profession, I'm a chemist or something, you already have a gender term there. So and there are ways to imply when you can write a star, for example, for chemists to imply, okay, we have a non-binary one, or that doesn't fit the binary, but it's just it's a concept, that's slowly coming, but there are no official pronouns yet. So no one I don't know, when you apply somewhere or at university, no one would know how to address you with a gender neutral pronoun. It's just not a real thing yet. So and a lot of terms were really, really, really hard to translate, because to translate into a heavy gendered language, it's just a mess, kind of. But I really applaud Verena for trying to be inclusive, trying to do something, trying to show, okay, there are ways, language evolves. And so, yeah, I really think her effort is just fantastic, and I really love it. So, yeah. But, it's not easy.
It's something I've always wondered about, especially with very gendered languages, not only German, but French. I know France has this series as well, and Italian. It seems like such a not a flaw in the language, but it's something that hasn't quite caught up to this idea of they're breaking down the binary between genders.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine the difficulty trying to maintain this idea of characters without gender or between genders.
Yeah, I've been just having these discussions in Italian a lot. What we could use, that there are many attempts, but also nothing official. Like if you're in a very, very quote unquote woke bubble, who's trying to be inclusive, there are kind of ways, because in Italian, you already, like in French, you already have, feminine and male endings, depending on the words you use. And in Italian, there's an attempt with the English schwa sound, then a star, then a U for gender neutral. Like, I've been having discussions, and I actually don't know what the manga went for, but it's something that's I could have checked beforehand, but I just own the German version. I do sometimes. I read manga in Italian, German, English, Japanese, sometimes also French, but yeah, I don't know what they did there, but it's really hard. It's very hard to do, so.
It's interesting, too, because I think with the Japanese language, it's interesting how inconsequential the use of, like, kare for, like, masculine third-person pronouns really is for determining a character's actual gender. Because you just don't use them very much. Like, there's so much that is just left up to the person and how they choose to refer to themselves. And that's reflected, I think, in the Gem's particular brand of genderless, where it's just this sort of random mishmash of, whatever type of language kind of fits the character's vibe, more so than just, like, girl and boy. Because I think Diamond, who's one of the more quote-unquote feminine-presenting gems, uses boku, which is a masculine pronoun, but they otherwise use very feminine and delicate speech.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because that's something you can't really... I wouldn't know how to translate that into English. Like, this inherent sort of... not just like a genderlessness of personal language, but a mix.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Conveying through the structure of your sentences, I am androgynous and have no concept of gender. I am combining feminine and masculine aspects on purpose. Because we just don't have those, like... I don't even... Language is weird. It's my extremely astute takeaway. But, yeah, so the prince of the Lunarians, meets Phos, and is obviously a very shady character. He's about 8 feet tall. So he is, I think, meant to be the same sort of size as Sensei, who is also very, very tall. He's like 8 feet tall. And the prince as well is like the same height. He towers above all the other Lunarians as well.
No, not all, because, I forgot his name or their name.
Yeah, not, Cicada.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Cicada's also very tall. But Cicada's also like a marshmallow. So that's something interesting. The gems are all like, they are hand chiseled by Sensei to look exactly the same except for their hair. And they're also powdered with white powder, so naturally they would all just be the color of their gem. You know, Phosphophyllite would be that mint green, and Cinnabar would be red. But, like, Sensei puts a white powder on them to make them all very pale-skinned and make them all look the same. And the Lunarians, and as well as the Admirabilis, are not like that. They're very... They all look different. The Lunarians, I feel like the background ones all look the same, but I think that's probably just Ichikawa Sensei drawing it for the vibe, to be honest. All the ones we meet with names have different character designs.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Because I think they definitely have more of a sense of self than the gems do in a lot of ways as well.
And it definitely lends itself to the idea of uniformity amongst the gems. And also, Sensei, his whole perception of what should be, right? Like, what should... I don't want to, ruin that aspect of what happens in the series, but
ruin it all.
Okay, spoilers for those who have not read the series, but
the spoiler warning is coming a bit late, my friend.
Yes. well, we know
there's no non-spoiler section in this episode.
Yeah, that's true. But we discover that Kongo-sensei is in fact not human. He is like a robotic android, some sort of machine that was created by humans, basically just to look after the world after it ended. He had a purpose when humanity was still there, but
to keep the last human company.
Yeah,
which is
and
sad.
once that happened, he was left alone, but then later left kind of protecting and in charge of these now humanoid gems that have their own personalities, that have their own need for protection and for care, because they just really don't know how to look after themselves necessarily. And they don't know anything about the world. And Kongo-sensei has all of this history of the world, like, just inherently in him, because he existed when humanity was still around. So he teaches them about, the not life cycles, but like the environment and how land works and the sky and all of these things. Like, he has knowledge, and he also tells them about why they need to be fighting Lunarians. Not so much the actual reason, but the idea of if you get caught, that'll be a bad thing. And that is part of Phos's disillusionment with Kongo-sensei and with the situation that they were raised in, that all of the gems were raised in, and brings up a further conflict later in the series when Phos is dealing, and other gems are dealing with the Lunarians in wanting to just try and know as much information as you can in order to come to your own conclusions, rather than have conclusions or the quote-unquote truth forced upon you without any of your own input, which is something that the gems have never had. They've never experienced this idea of exploring themselves. They were just given a job and told to do that job and live happily with each other and don't question anything.
Yeah. I definitely think there's, within the theme of, like, usefulness and the meaning of work, there is this idea of, like, the difference between finding a purpose for yourself and finding your purpose in other people, because of other people, what other people are putting onto you, and how that's not really any kind of self-actualization. Because, like, Phos, at the point that we are in the manga, is, oh my god. But,
yeah.
definitely not going to have a happy ending. I'm gonna say that. They, at this point, have taken onto themselves so many different things that they are meant to be about, that they're supposed to be here for, that they never stop to actually form real, meaningful relationships with anyone around them. And they're really coming to the consequences of that now. You know, basically they've tried to be everything to everybody for so long, but when you're everything to everybody, you're not actually anything at all.
And, well, it also doesn't help that every time Phos loses a part of their original body, part of their memories disappear. Yeah, so it's that whole idea of them physically changing is also representative of them forgetting the past or forgetting parts of their original self, which is terrifying, but also a really strong theme in this whole larger story of the Lustrous.
I did. There's so much to talk about. It's like I want to finish talking about the gender stuff before I get into the body stuff. There is a lot, I think, about, like, what makes the self and the necessity of the body in that. Like, I think it's very interesting that the gems are, like, obviously, later in the series, this is another big spoiler, I guess, Phos loses their entire head and has it replaced by another gem's head. But they still retain a large part of their personality because, you know, at that point there is less than half of them at that point is Phosphophyllite, but there's still some Phosphophyllite in them. So those inclusions maintain their personality, even though their personality changes somewhat. We've got this, like, idea of a species that is not, you know, they don't have a brain, right? They don't have, like, a central part of their body. It's just spread out throughout everything. You know, every wisp of hair, every finger is just as much a part of their thinking and their feeling as the rest of them.
The hair, not so much.
So there's inherently...
It's explained for some reason that the hair doesn't really store memories or something.
It's got, like, less inclusions, but it still includes some of it. Right? So there is always a chance when cutting hair that you can lose memories, you just probably won't lose as much. And that's why they try not to cut each other's hair. But it's like, if it happens, they're like, oh well, you'll probably still remember who you are, maybe.
Fingers crossed. Let's hope.
This was really just spinning a roulette. But yeah, I found that interesting because, like, I think a lot of times there's this idea of, like, the body and the mind, or the body and the soul being separate and having nothing to do with each other. But I think Land of the Lustrous, not just through this idea of, like, this triad that is somewhat incomplete without each other, but also just in the bodies of the gems themselves. This idea that without body, without being bodied, you do not have a self. That the body is an inherent part of who you are. Which I think is interesting. It made me think of, I'm not Catholic anymore, but I was born and raised Catholic. And there's the idea of, like, the theology of the body within
body
Catholicism. Well, it's more like the idea that your body is, like, a sacred temple created to house, like, your soul, so you should treat it as this sacred thing. Which, you know, I don't want to get into all of that. But I thought about that when I was reading And I think it's reflected also in, like, the very visceral body horror of the series. Which we hadn't talked about yet, but this series is scary. There's no, like, blood or anything because these people are rocks, but they are getting shattered. They are just tossing body parts everywhere. There's one part where Diamond, like, gets their arm cut off and then immediately grabs their arm and starts whacking it at the Lunarians.
That was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty sick. Like, the stuff Bort does with their hair is cool, Phos, and, like, their gold alloy. But also, like, we see from very early on that the body horror is not just connected to, like, them literally, like, getting punched around by a Lunarian, but, like, they also start to shatter in response to emotional trauma. And Phos in particular has this liquid gold alloy in their body, so when they start to crack apart, the alloy seeps through like tears. Which is just such a sad image. But, yeah, it's, so there as well you see, like, the physicality of the body, I think, connected to, you know, the emotional self and the spiritual self.
Well, it parallels very well with Cinnabar as well. They're just being in a constant liquid state because of a lower boiling point, and how their venom, quote unquote, is an emotional expulsion from them, more than something they can't control, but is something that is very innately part of them. There's a lot of stuff with the solids and the liquids for these characters.
And what was I saying with Sensei? So he's this machine, and I think there is, like, going back to the themes of, like, gender within the series, and gender roles specifically, and patriarchy, is that we have this machine that takes on a specifically masculine form, who is a machine created by a system that existed thousands of years ago that is now obsolete, who, due to having no other concept for what the world can be, he just takes up the role of, like, leader of these basically children. Like, they look so small in his arms, because, again, he's, like, 9 feet tall or whatever. Just, like, cradling these little wayfish, genderless creatures. And, you know, he creates a system where he's at the top and all the other gems are around him. Not because he wants to. Later on, he's like, literally, I was made as a subordinate, and, like, please just order me around. I'm so scared. Because he doesn't know anything else, he takes on the role of a leader. And, you know, takes on the name Sensei and creates a school, even though it's not a school because the characters don't go to class. So it's like
but Sensei teaches them, like, you see Sensei educating Phos after they were born.
I think for, like, the first 100 years they get classes, and then they're just sent to go fight Lunarians.
But they still live and sleep in a building called the school. Which is kind of weird. That was his idea, where he was like, okay, I'm going to be the teacher, and you're going to be the children, and I'm going to make a school. I think there's definitely some commentary going on there. And yeah, it's mirrored with the much more obviously sinister character of Akemiya, the prince of the Lunarians. Because I think at this point, Kongo-sensei, he's an AI, right? He's not trying... He genuinely loves the gems, and he's trying to do the best that he can, and he has no idea what the fuck is happening.
Right.
He doesn't have an agenda, necessarily, that he's aware of. He's just programmed, certainly.
Yeah, and, like, the things that he doesn't tell them, it's because he literally was programmed not to.
Uh-huh.
So, I kind of feel bad for him. But, especially now, it's like he keeps trying, and he's, like, malfunctioning. He's trying so hard to, like, tell them what's going on. And the gems are just like, it's okay. It's okay, just rest. It's not okay, but, like, just rest. But Akemiya is a figure who, like, pretends to be very forthcoming with information and is definitely lying about most of it. He is... Oh, he's complicated too. But he is... Basically, he was chosen as the prince because he's just good at everything, right? And they call him Prince because, I don't know, they wanted to. He didn't really want a name. So, no, he said to call him a prince because he didn't want to be called Akemiya.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What a guy. He is... Yeah, I mean, his slipperiness is very visually represented through the fact that he's, like, constantly morphing through different versions of himself. Because he's got the, like, the Buddhist thing. You guys can interrupt if you think I'm, like, way off base, by the way.
No,
right.
I do agree with a lot with what you're saying. Because I think there's... The thing with Lustrous is that there's, I think, an intended interpretation, but then I think there's also a lot of, like, additional interpretation that comes with personal experience and personal background and whatever else, you know, you want to call it.
Right.
So it's one that is, like, so interesting to really dive into, and so some people are hyper aware of certain themes or certain tropes or whatever within the series, or they really focus on certain aspects of it, and then others focus on things that are completely opposite of that or completely, like, divorced from that. And so, but really it's a product of all of that. There's so many different moving pieces, just like there's so many different gems, and they all represent something different in personality and in, like, just what they are and how they feel about their situations. And we see, again, like, with those gems, they're not, despite looking a very uniform way, they all have very personal backgrounds and histories and opinions. Some that comes with age, some that comes with tragedy in their past, some that comes with just wanting to, like Phos, learn more about the world around them, and the questioning of why they've been doing these things for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so it's just a really interesting mishmash of, like, everything. So it's, yeah, I mean, like, it's really wonderful to always hear the different parts of discussion for this series, because I feel like you could read 300 articles on the series and no two will necessarily be the same, because they will have an inherently unique takeaway from a lot of this, which isn't to say that there isn't a correct way to interpret stuff, but just the additional way of relating to characters as well, I think.
For me, it's kind of weird because the Lunarians clearly left gender behind. But then some characters are just, I don't know, happy to perform, like the prince to perform certain roles, which I think is interesting again, so...
Well, I think it's just him, because, like, he gets something out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, he's very much performing the role of, like, this patriarch.
Right.
Gives him what he wants. You know, whether that's ruling over the Lunarians, or trying to get Kongo-sensei to do what he wants, or, you know, the stuff with Cairngorm.
Oh my god.
Which, I don't know, did we want to finally get to Cairngorm?
Yeah. I think so.
The time has come.
Especially if we're talking about
Phos...
performing gender. Like...
Yes. Yes. Okay, so, Phos, after meeting the prince, hatches a plan with the prince to go back to the gems, to Earth, to the gem school, and basically manipulate as many of them as they can to come back to the moon with them. Because what the prince wants to do is agitate Kongo-sensei enough that basically it'll jolt his broken systems back into working. Because the Lunarians want to return to nothingness, which they can only do if Kongo-sensei prays for them. That was what he was created for. He's designed to look like a bodhisattva, and he's actually named after Jizo Bosatsu, his, like, longer machine name. So he's supposed to, like, pray for people after their death to, you know, return them to nothing. And for whatever reason, Kongo-sensei, since the last human died, has not been able to do that. And the Lunarians are basically a bunch of lost souls who should be dead, but no one was ever there to pray for them and send them safely onward. So their only chance at an afterlife, essentially, is at peace. They've been alive for thousands and thousands of years. It sounds horrible.
Yeah, yikes.
They just want to be that. They just want to stop. So Kongo-sensei is supposed to pray for them. Of course, Akemiya is hiding some very important details about what will happen if Kongo-sensei prays for them. But he's hiding a lot of things, so, you know, surprise. Anyway, Phos goes back to the gem school and, successfully manipulates a bunch of them to come back with them. Including Cairngorm, who they're like, Cairngorm, you're my partner, you're coming with me, you don't have a choice. And Cairngorm's like, okay, fine. But once they get back to the moon, it turns out that the reason that Cairngorm is not... Supposedly, I'm going to say that none of this information is trustworthy at all, because it comes from the prince. But they have particles of ghost quartz, who was Phos's partner and loved Phos very much, still in the irises of their eyes. And the prince says, if you want to be free, I will cut ghost quartz out of you. And there's a very terrifying scene where Cairngorm's like, yes, I want to be free, and then, like, they get wrenched backwards out the door by their eyes, and it's terrifying. Like, no, you're not gonna do this. But, yeah, they do get that removed from them, and from there, they are ostensibly free to be who they really are. but immediately find themselves utterly devoted to the prince in everything.
Yeah.
Because they're rebelling, which I get, but also, like, yeah, the prince, basically, they don't like the name Cairngorm because it's something that Sensei gave them without their permission or agency. So they don't want to be called that. So the prince starts calling them the princess, which is not different because it's just another man deciding who they are, but you know, I see how they perceive it as different in the moment.
Well, it's because he's manipulating them with something that they've always wanted. He gave them that freedom, and so now there's this devotion there, which is very common with abusive relationships, of like, well, you know, I'm only doing the best for you. Like, you need me, and, you know, I care about you, which was something that Sensei also provided for them, but they didn't feel like that was, you know, they had the issue with it. And so it's not true freedom, obviously. But they're not experienced enough to know the difference. And so the manipulation is playing right into their weaknesses, as it were. They just feel like they're unshackled from literally being stuck inside this other person and having zero agency.
We specifically see, like, them choosing their clothes. They like really elaborate clothes. And one of the first things that they're told to choose is they're given, like, 4 sets of underwear. And they're supposed to choose which one they like. But what I thought was kind of creepy about that was that one of them was, like, this super skimpy bikini, and then the other 3 looked like what Antarcticite wore. Which Cairngorm has a complex because ghost courts always encourage them to look like Antarcticite, who is, for reference, one of the more sort of, I guess, butch of the gems. Very short hair, very serious personality. Doesn't like frilly clothes. And, you know, Cairngorm always resented being told by a part of their body that they didn't have any control over, that they had to look like Antarcticite for Phos's sake. So they're like, I want to go in the opposite direction. Yeah. But it's like literally the only option they were given is, do you want to look like Antarcticite, or do you want to look like a swimsuit model?
Well, again,
like, I feel like there's some sort of agenda here. I don't know.
It's the perception of autonomy without actually being autonomous.
Yes. Which continues and continues, because the prince, first of all, is like, I've always thought you were a very special gem, and then pulls out Cairngorm's dismembered arm that had been taken to the moon years and years ago. Is like, your color is so beautiful.
Ugh.
Ugh. Stalker.
And it's like, look at somebody actually, like, treating you like a fucking object. Wow. But just, like, keeping their arm in a box, just staring at it, thinking about the day, one day in hundreds of years, when they will finally be able to fuck that rock. Speaking of which, Cairngorm, for their part, has no idea why any of this is happening. They don't understand why they're being called princess. They don't understand what the word means. They don't understand what it means in relation to the word prince. They don't have a concept of feminine or masculine clothing. They don't know what a wedding is.
They don't know what a
Prince
date
forces
is.
them to participate in a wedding. They don't know what a date is. They don't know what a kiss is.
Oh boy.
And they definitely do not know what other kinds of physical intimacy are. And the prince, who I'm gonna reiterate is twice the size of Cairngorm, which just makes it scarier. The prince is doing some shenanigans with Cairngorm that Cairngorm has no knowledge of, no possible way to understand, and no possible way to consent to, because they do not understand. Which is unintentionally hilarious, as I was telling G earlier, because all of the sound effects are great. Because it's like they just like hold each other and it's just like clonk. I'm like, that's the sexiest thing I've ever seen right there. Clang.
But it's like hitting
why
a
would you even
concrete
want
wall, stacking it on some rocks. It's like, oh, so sexy.
Oh man, I really want to have sex with this disembodied arm I found that's made out of rocks.
You all know what he's doing with that.
Well, I mean, that does not sound comfortable at all. Just cold, hard, dead rock.
Oh my
Well, I mean, there's got to be a reason why he didn't make it into jewelry, right? He was like, I need this to stay in the shape of a hand.
But
Maybe he's Kira Yoshikage.
He just wants to live a simple life.
He's just taking this hand on dates even before Cairngorm gets to the moon. Caressing it.
Oh my god. But I think it's very, aside from the creepy rock fetishism, I think it's very purposeful that he knew that Cairngorm was the, I guess, emotionally most immature gem, insofar, and the most desperate as well for individuality, because of just how they were formed, of their entire being. And so it's not coincidence that he went after Cairngorm. If it was Phos, he would have gone after Phos. If it was any of the other gems, he would have gone after them. But because of the unique nature of Cairngorm and their relationship to themselves, to ghost courts, and all of the experiences they've had as this kind of disembodied additional person within another person, that he was able to really manipulate his way, or a mouthpiece for his ideals to push onto the rest of the Lustrous. So, yeah.
I'm just so worried about Cairngorm.
Yikes. Yeah.
That's not going to end well. None of this is going to end well.
No.
It's going to be a tragedy for sure, but... babe. I love you. I love you, but...
But it's something I kind of want to point out, because I feel like now is a good point to maybe talk about racial implications, because Ichikawa, because in her other works, she's never been known to write or POC characters really well, or I don't know, be mindful about it. And I think Cairngorm is another case of it's. And I don't want to talk about intentionalism a lot, but you know that she is the only black character, quote unquote, in the series, and you know, as a as a mirror to Phos maybe, and as I don't know. It just rubs me a really wrong way. I don't know, like
it is. I think also interesting that because I'm sure like for Ichikawa's part, it's probably just like Cairngorm is a black gem, so they're black. That's what color they are. Board is also black. But I definitely also think in that context it's interesting that Cairngorm didn't really decide to rub the powder off. That was the prince as well. Being like, I like the color of your gem. I like the color of your arm. So you shouldn't wear that powder. And Cairngorm's like, oh, someone complimented me, so I'm just gonna not wear that powder anymore. I think it's interesting, actually, that Kongo-sensei, his sort of natural instinct was to be like, oh, because it was like a gem that was like, it's kind of lonely that like, you know, we are all different gems with different properties. So I want us to all look the same, which is, you know, weird. I'm not entirely sure what Ichikawa Sensei is getting at with that. It's definitely creepy that, like, they're all literally chiseled to look exactly the same.
Yeah, it's...
And I think that that is meant to be creepy. Like, I think that's meant to be off-putting. But I'm not sure yet what she's saying with it. But also the fact that, like, Kongo-sensei just defaulted to, like, oh, I'm supposed to make them all the same color, so I'm going to make them this, like, ghostly paper white, is kind of probably not intentional at all. Like, probably didn't even cross her mind at all as, like, oh,
It's not the first time this is happening in her works, because, you know, it is, you know, to be used as a foil mechanism for the lighter skin protagonist. And I think that's, you know, where it's getting a bigger problem, kind of.
Yeah, that
it's
is...
not the first time.
I don't really know, like, her other work at all. Is there, like, a particular other work that you're thinking
of? It has happened in all of her stuff. It has happened several times
specific
now.
Series, though. Because I don't know the stories, so...
It's not the first time, so... Because I checked, I was like, Because it just rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, yeah. And then I also talked to a POC friend, and they also said, yeah, I've noticed that too. So it's more of a, like, I don't smell or see any ill intentions there, but it's like just very, it's just very, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's an unawareness.
It's
just.
I think that they like contrasting black and white in other aspects of their art as well.
Yeah. We could talk about the way art that, like, a lot,
Night
I think, in a different section.
The way that like Night and Space are portrayed is also very unique, where, you know, she's essentially starting with an entirely black base and drawing these stark whites on top of it. So I wonder, she probably just finds that contrast visually appealing, but it is...
Oh, I'm sure she does,
That doesn't make it okay, you know? It's like, stop. Yeah. Yep. That seems like a blind spot. That sucks.
But it just, you know, it's just the general lack of diversity in manga, in mainstream manga. So, yeah.
Yeah. Even, like, when it comes to, like, colorism within Japan, of, like... Because, again, it's, like, unfortunate that, you know, in creating these ethereal, beautiful creatures, her instinct was, like, not just light-skinned, but, like, white. Like, paper white. You know, because obviously, like, within Japan as well, there's a large range of skin tones that are very common here. I teach in southern Japan, where like a good half of my students have very dark skin. So it's like, you know, the connection between whiteness and like the beautiful, the celestial, the ethereal, the angelic is, you know, something that unfortunately exists around the world and sucks.
Because, you know, Ichikawa made the conscious choice to powder up all the gems and make them look this, and have them this certain look. And I think it's a bit, I don't know, could have used more consideration maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It's just so common in manga. Like, it's like anytime I'm, like, talking about Magus of the Library, too. It's like... You know,
yeah.
This kid in this world full of, you know, dark-skinned people of color is, like, super oppressed and discriminated against because he's the only white kid with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Green eyes,
you're like,
excuse you.
Okay, that's the premise, but, like, I promise it's really good in every other respect, but also, like, if you don't want to read it because of that reason, it is totally so valid. And manga, why are you like this? I mean, I know why it's like this, but it's also like...
Sigh. This is the deepest, longest sigh.
Just a sigh. Yeah.
On that note, did we want to talk about the art? Because it is very, like, it's signature to Ichikawa's style. But it really pulls the series to the forefront, and it's what makes it so memorable in a sense. If it didn't have the elements that Ichikawa put into it, in just how paneling's done, in that contrast that you were discussing before, there's just a beauty in
simplicity.
In how yes, exactly. There's not a huge amount of screen tones and stuff used in it, which is very purposeful, and I think it lends itself to a very particular look with the series.
I disagree, because I think because it's really hard to convey the beauty of gems in black and white, and she uses phenomenal screen tone work and contrast, especially on the gems and hair.
That's what I was about to say. That is, like, when she does choose to, like, you know, she's very purposeful with her screen tone, is I guess what it comes down to. Because, like, I was definitely, like, taking pictures of a lot of the images of, like, Diamond, especially, who has a very complicated refraction pattern. And, you know, that is represented through screen tone, and it's very beautiful. There's also, like, this spread early on where Phos goes into the ocean.
And you see the ocean.
And you turn the page.
Wow.
And it's just, like, all of the light, you know, reflecting throughout the ocean in different ways. And it's one of the most stunning 2-page spreads I think I've seen in manga.
Right.
And it's entirely just, like, this careful attention to light that I think, you know, is also present in, like, the way that she chooses to contrast the day and the night. That little, like, cave that Cinnabar always looks out of is also another beautiful one. The
that's
crystals that make up the school.
The
crystals that make up the school and how they reflect the light are also beautiful. There is just, like, this constant, very careful attention to where the lights and darks are on the page and how the light is being portrayed. Which is, I think, it's so purposeful. I keep saying that word, but it remains true.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, the art is gorgeous. The paneling, I think, is some of the most, like, inventive and experimental in the manga that we're getting in English right now. Because we don't get a lot of, like, the really underground stuff over here. But, yeah, you know, when I compare it to, like, 70s shoujo manga, and specifically Year 24, that's what I'm thinking of mostly, is, like, how the paneling is manipulated in very stylistic and experimental ways to convey the complex emotions of the characters, which is combined, I think, very effectively both with the use of light and, you know, the use of this body horror that is very prominent throughout the series. You know, I think of, like, back when Phos was having trouble sleeping after they lost Antarcticite, and, you know, they would turn, and, you know, Antarcticite would be there glowing in the night sky, and then shatter in front of them. It's just, you know, there's a lot of emotion there.
Definitely, yeah.
That is being conveyed without any dialogue at all. You really get a feel for where Phos is in terms of their mental state and their grief. Yeah, the characters are hard to tell apart, but I feel like that's on purpose.
I didn't have any trouble with that. Maybe because I watched the animation beforehand.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like I said, watching the anime made it a lot easier for me because I was picturing colors. It sounds like because G knew what colors they were because she's a big old nerd.
Stop bullying G. Is this the Bully G podcast? Jeez.
Yes, it's the Bullying G podcast. Ha. You like rocks. Ha. But, you know, you said that, like, because you kind of could picture the colors in your head, it was easier to tell them apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really have any trouble telling them apart the second time through, but I definitely did when I was reading, like, volume to volume as it was coming out. So, like, I get where people are coming from when they're like, oh, I got frustrated with that series because everyone looked the same. But
Plus,
also, like, I feel like they look the same on purpose. Like, do you really think that Ichikawa-sensei is so bad at drawing faces that she's just drawing the same character over and over again?
well, considering what's popular,
you know,
I wouldn't put it past people thinking that same face is
okay.
fine.
But, like, the number of people who have been like, she draws the same face over and over, therefore the art is bad, is infuriating.
Yeah, no.
Because I'm like, it's an intentional choice, for one, which is confirmed in text later on in the series, just in case it wasn't obvious.
Yeah.
But also, like, how can you look at this and say it's bad art?
Yeah. Plus, we do get introduced to, like, so many gems over the course of the series that I can understand being confused. Because there's this, like, oh, there's Zircon here, and then there's Euclide, and then there's this character, and this character, and like, okay, were they ever introduced before? I don't know if they were ever introduced before. So it's a constant, like...
Who the hell is Watermelon Tourmaline?
Exactly. So it is kind of a revolving door of characters, but again, I think that's very purposeful. Like, there's a reason that we have some recurring characters, and then some that we see and are introduced at certain points for very specific reasons.
Yeah. Yep. I also think that, like, just a lot of the imagery, the fantasy and sci-fi imagery is very cool and unique.
Well, I've
the
read
Buddhist
that
imagery of the Lunarians.
she wanted to become an industrial designer, and I think it's showing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Makes so much sense. That explains everything. Also, just the fact that she was like, I want to make a series about rocks that are people. Yeah,
what
it makes
are you
sense
saying
to me.
about rock people? Right?
Nothing at all. Just that they might have an interest in industrial design. She's gonna kill me after this podcast.
Go fly over there. Throttle you.
Yeah.
This time I'll be fighting you in the
like,
Denny's
her
car
character...
park.
Yeah. Oh my god. Oh no. My Denny's car park has come back to bite me. Also, I will fight you in the Denny's car park if you say Haruko Ichikawa's artwork is bad.
Yeah, I'm coming for you too, like.
All three of us will just take you if we're not literally beating each other up.
We've got,
which is apparently what's going to happen.
We've got 3 continents covered. Europe, Asia, and Australia. You have no chance.
That's true. Were there any other, like, major things that we wanted to cover?
I wanted to mention something I picked up on. It was actually about lapis lazuli. Well, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's very
lapis.
very good. Lapis lazuli.
Yeah.
They remind him, so with their during battle and their hyperfixation, and when Phos is paying attention more, I kind of got vibes that they were, or the original was neurodivergent. Did you pick up on that, or? Because I was like, kind of like, because they pay so much attention to the Lunarians and analyze everything that they forget to fight, and like this hyperfixation I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that I, like, consciously was thinking in terms of, like, neurodiversity, but I definitely picked up on that being kind of interesting. I think I, like, connected it to my ADD in my head, but, you know, if you connected it to, like, being on the spectrum as well. But I think that fits into a lot of the gems, and overall, like, there are definitely themes of, like, mental illness throughout the series, and, like...
I don't know how to feel about this double personality with Ghost and Kingdom, if I'm really honest. Like...
I think it's just because I think with them, it's less like a mental illness thing and more like a personal agency and how do you define the self. It gets called a mental illness later. Oh, does it?
Yes.
It doesn't in English. Does it get called that in, like,
because
11th or 12th volume?
I was so in Hoseki no Kuni fever, I went on to read the newest chapters.
Oh.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. I mean, where I've read it, I can only talk about the first 10 volumes, really. It seems more, like, connected to, like, personal agency and, like, how you define the self, which are also themes.
No, because my red flag radar was up, and I was like, I don't know how to feel about this, and then, yeah.
It'd be interesting to see how if that is an issue that I presume in later chapters, how that will be handled, translated, I mean.
I also don't trust those scams.
Yeah, sure, right. I don't, like...
incongruencies. No. Like, Land of the Lustrous is a series that is very, very... just as purposeful as it is with its art, it is with the specific words that it uses. And, like, even within, like, the English translation, there's a couple points where I'm like, I don't know if that quite gets it, you know?
Yeah.
So, I feel like I want to read the official translation before I make a judgment. Because I feel like if you describe something as a neurosis or something in Japanese, it's a little different from describing it as a mental illness. It's more like, that person's crazy! Which is not great, but it's also, like, part of... I mean, they've been calling Phos crazy forever.
Man, that's wild.
Or Alexandrite. They're like, oh, great, you stuck me with crazy. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Which we can talk about the casual ableism of that, but...
Yeah, it's...
But, I think that there's a difference between, like, making an offhand joke like that and, like, literally being like, this is exactly what having DID is like. It's like you're a gem with another gem inside of you.
Yeah, right. I mean, the closest the manga maybe comes to talking about disabilities, maybe with Pat Paracha? Maybe?
Yeah. I think the biggest one would be PTSD and Phos,
yeah, right.
honestly. Actually, a lot of the characters, which is what I was getting at with, like, themes of mental illness, is more, like, dealing with trauma and grief, and the fact that a lot of why Phos is in the situation they are right now is that they really, even though every character is kind of vaguely nice to everyone else, they don't have a safe space where they can really just, like, talk shit out.
Mm-hmm.
Talk through their feelings about losing Antarcticite. Talk through their feelings about losing Ghost Quartz. They just get verbally abused by Cairngorm. Because, to clarify, it was definitely their fault. But, you know, that doesn't mean that they don't deserve a space to, like, talk through their grief. Mm-hmm. Which is something that Kongo-sensei can't give them because he's a machine. And that the gems can't give them because they just don't have that emotional maturity, I don't think. And a lot of them are dealing with issues of their own.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a reason.
Yellow Diamond.
Yeah. I was about to say, there's a reason Yellow Diamond decided to join the moon expedition, but then had a complete mental breakdown as soon as they got there. Like, there's a lot of...
Yeah, they're, like, having hallucinations about being a Lunarian. They,
yeah.
Jumped off a balcony. Yeah. Which, you know, obviously is not a suicidal... It could be considered self-harm, I guess, but it's not like they have a concept of death, so they wouldn't be thinking suicide, but, like, the imagery is obviously that. And, like, Alexandrite, having this very violent reaction, and, like, really diving into their study of the Lunarians, because they hate the Lunarians so much for taking their partner. So they just let this grief and this anger over their loss take over their entire life, so that it's literally their only hobby. That's pretty depressing. Rutiel as well is the same way. They just, you know, they help the other gems, but the only thing that's ever on their mind is Pod Parasha and trying to bring them back into a waking state. So I think there is not really themes of, like, you know, specific, like, you know, we're going to talk about bipolar disorder today, but there is definitely this undercurrent of, like, what happens when you're dealing with a lot of mental, emotional shit and you don't have a deep enough support system to help you through it. Like, the only person who will lend, like, an ear is the Prince of the Lunarians, who, again, is definitely lying all of the time.
Yes.
And also not listening when you talk to him.
Did he nod?
He nods.
Yeah, right.
He's just, like, working on his... reading his newspaper or working on his little trinkets. And he's like... yeah, yeah.
Tongue kissing.
Oh
my god.
And that's sort of an interesting, again, to go back to the abuse narrative, is the dismissal of, like, hearing your partner's, like, concerns, but then always going to them for, like, you're relying on them to do all this stuff for you, and you're putting them in that position, but then never being emotionally there for them because you don't
Yeah.
actually care. You just want that power over someone.
Speaking of how little the prince cares about anyone,
Mm-hmm.
And also about, I guess, abusive dismissal of people, but on a much larger scale. The Admirabilis really get the short end of the stick in this series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Even in this
Basically,
podcast
the prince
right now.
goes to Phos. Like, so, yeah, well, I mean, they don't show up that often because nobody pays attention
And I
to
was
them.
disappointed by that, kind of, because I thought they...
Me too!
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm like... Yeah, because, like, I feel like they get dismissed because, you know, they die off so quickly. But it's like, you know, that doesn't make them any less, like, sentient and also based on a third of humanity and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I understand why the characters are dismissing them, but I also don't like how that means that the narrative is dismissing their input.
Mm-hmm.
But basically the prince comes to Phos and is like, so the Lunarians have ground all of the gems that they brought to the moon before this coup into dust and spread it across the surface of the moon.
Which is
Make it
just
shiny.
horrifying.
absolutely genius.
It's terrifying.
I mean,
So
he wants to...
scary.
I mean, just think about it. Like, the moon is, like, how far away from the planet they live on? I don't know. But then, he has this genius idea. Like, there's, like, 30 gem people. Let's say 30 gem people. And he has this genius idea that he wants to cover the entire moon of this gem powder for Sensei to see from outer space. So that he, like, this blew my mind. Like,
It's horrifying.
I mean, I think it's more like, yeah, it's more of an emotional truth than like. Also, we don't know how big the moons are because there's 6 of them now. So we don't know if the Lunarians are on the moon or if they're on one of the other moons. But also I think it's more like the emotional truth of like, you know, I am going to hurt everything that you love and I am going to show you.
yeah, but Sensei isn't gonna see shit.
Of course he's not. And that's part of it, like, that a lot of times abusive people don't, like, their logic doesn't make sense.
Right.
And
That's true.
And so there's a point of, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to hurt you, and you know that I'm hurting you in this moment. And so the whole thing, like, is horrifying. Obviously, it just makes it makes the entirety of the Lustrous and their position and what they've been doing for thousands of years futile. Like, there's no way they will ever be able to get back what they've lost, right? And all of the people that they've lost over the many centuries. And I mean, he lies and says, like, oh yes, we can put them back together, which is never going to happen. Like, that's not how this works. But it's a narrative of giving them hope, but also.
Do you think he's lying?
I mean, they're. I don't know if, like, well, one, we can't trust them, so there's not, like, I doubt he's being very truthful. It's not that inherently there's no way, if you had thousands upon thousands of years to collect all of the micro fragments of these gems and stick them back together. Like, I'm sure there's a way, because these are creatures with no sense of time. But at the same time, it was purposefully done in a way to evoke upset from Sensei, but in a way that he will never be able to acknowledge and never be able to recognize. And so it's less of a, like, it's not effective, but it's something that he does because he knows when that truth comes out that it will hurt all the more. And again, that's just very...
Yeah, and it's... That's, like, a core difference between the Lunarians and the gems that is, like, sort of put forth within the series is that the Lunarians represent the spirit of humanity, and that includes their cruelty, their desire to inflict pain, which is something that Phos is the only gem. And I do know vaguely, kind of, the outline of what happens in 11 and 12, which kind of follows the same line. But Phos is the only gem who we see who's, like, Alexandrite wants to kill them, but Phos wants to inflict pain on Kongo-sensei by the end of everything that they've been through in Volume 10. And they don't care anymore if anything happens. They just want Sensei to know how hurt they are. And I think one of the saddest things about, like, the prince's, like, duplicitousness is, like, he goes through all of this BS about how, like, oh, you've really kickstarted our civilization, like, look at all this progress we're making, remaking these gems. And then Phos, you know, goes back down to Earth and is captured by the gems and shattered and scattered throughout the land strip. And 220 years later, Kongo-sensei has managed to put enough of them back together that they regain consciousness. And meanwhile, the prince is like, oh, we had this brief experiment to try to resuscitate the gems that have been made into dust that we ended 220 years ago. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sad.
It is. It's really sad. And a lot of it comes from just this, and it's terrifying to say, but it is the truthism that it's like, the worst parts of the Lunarians are the human parts of them. Like, this idea of the soul, of being able to inflict pain, of being able to manipulate people. Because bones can't manipulate people, right? Like, they don't have consciousness in the real world. Like, bones are just inanimate objects that are within our body. And so they provide a very vital function, and they have their purpose. But, and again, that can be tied back to this whole idea of, like, knowing your place and having your role. But it's the and you see it a lot, like, with the most heinous of crime stuff, that there's this monstrous element that can be unlocked from humanity. And the evils that we've seen in the world and in history have all been coming from a human place. And so it's a very complicated relationship. Like, humanity has a immensely, infinitely deep potential for kindness and empathy and care and hope and positivity, but an equally deep potential for just the worst things comprehensible of upset and of hatred and of just pure evil. And so it is a balance of those things, and that's part of the human experience. Even if you don't necessarily, fight against that within yourself, there's always bad people, and there's always immensely good people. And so it's just part of, like, how we understand the world as human readers, and in respect to this, and in respect to the Lunarians, who are literally just the physicality of the soul, of the human personality, as it were.
what you just said, like, sent my mind in, like, 3 different directions at once.
Yeah, I kind of
Try
disagree
to sum it up.
with you with what you said right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It was a little for me. It was a bit too, I don't know, black and white, because as I was
Well, of
because
course,
I was
yeah.
trying to predict, or where it was headed, and we tend to get attached to the things we first see. Like when we hear a story and it's being told to us twice and it's different, we tend to believe the first version of the story we've heard. But as I see the Lunarians, or saw them, I like, okay, they can't pass on to the afterlife because of some problem that's created somewhere, and they've run out of all kinds of ideas to solve this problem, and are starting to resort to very crude, very horrible methods. As useless they might be, like
it's like a desperation.
like putting the gems, making them to powder and putting them on the moon, and, like, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it's a desperation. It's a
desperation,
thing,
right?
Yeah.
But they attack, because they deserve peace or to move on, and they are not getting it. So this is where my first conflict is already starting. And they probably, when it comes to souls, we also have this very, 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 very big spectrum of from kindness to absolute horrible or horrible stuff.
Well, of course. I mean, there's elements of both in all people.
Yeah.
It's just
and this is as a prince, I guess, of these people, as a leader. I would say he's doing his job, not a really good job. I think he himself mentions it, that they're not really good at what they're doing.
Well, it's like, that's a parallel to Kongo-sensei, who has
right.
also not done a very good job as the leader of the gems.
Yeah, right. Aside from the shady stuff, he's doing with his wedding and dating, like, I agree, this is shady, but I think that he is working, that he will keep his word of restoring the gems. And that because he I don't see that too many ill intentions. Sure, when he learned that, or he knew that, if Sensei started praying again and he's defect, the gems would also disappear because Sensei can't do his job properly. It was very selfish. It was very, very, and of course it was shady to not tell the gems. But as I see it, as they're trying to work together, I think they're interested in finding a common solution that works for everyone, or because I don't see it as a black and white, despite that the manga being very black and white with its art and the symmetry. We haven't even talked about the symmetry. Jesus. Yeah, this is how I see it. I think they're going to work towards, a common goal that works for everyone. And, for Phos, something very special is going to happen to Phos. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, the old adage of the path to hell is paved with good intentions, is very true. You can have the best intentions, but it doesn't necessarily mean it ends with the best solution, right?
I think I'm kind of in the middle of you two. First of all, where I am in the series now, obviously without the context of the future chapters, I think Ichikawa Sensei has a fairly cynical idea of what human nature is that I don't necessarily agree with fully. There's points where I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily true, or I think that's too simplistic. But I do kind of get the idea that she's leaning towards a more cynical read on what humanity is. But at the same time, for me, Phos, who represents sort of the most human-like of the gems,
yeah, it's true.
The fact that they're the initial trait that sets them apart, other than sheer brazenness, is their kindness. They are constantly trying to do things for other people. When they hear about Cinnabar's plight, their response is not, oh well, their response is, I have to do something.
Uh-huh. And that's also mirrored
and
in
we
their...
see, like, throughout,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're so kind, but it's like they lose that over time to pain.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, is more where the darkness of the Lunarians comes through, is not, like, this inherent, like, human nature thing, so much as, like, when you push people so far, when you leave them with no other way, when they've been through thousands and thousands of years of pain and trauma and hurt and lost so much, and you leave them with no other way out, then that's when you see this monstrous side come through.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more how I see them. You know, we kind of, like, personally, I think that Aikmi is probably lying about the Admirabilis actually coming to him and being like, oh, please let us be slaves on the moon. I think...
But they seem to live a good
suspect.
life,
I think,
because, you know, they didn't have any food on the planet anymore, and, like, they're eating the dust on the moon and live there.
They didn't have any food on the planet anymore, according to who?
I mean, I think they know, like, themselves if they have food or not. Like...
But have you heard from the mouth of an Admirabilis that they had no food on the planet anymore, and that's why they moved to the moon voluntarily?
Well, the slug...
It's like who the information is coming from.
Visiting Phos...
The slug...
doesn't confirm that, like... The slug tells a different story. That's true.
Yeah, so I'm like, nothing... See, I agree that the prince is not lying about wanting to return to nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
And
think
return
we all
the
agree on
Lunarians
that.
to nothingness.
Yeah.
But I think that everything he says is very suspect, because he has been shown to be a liar in the past.
Yeah, true.
And he is definitely manipulating all of the Lunarians. Like, you know, he has personally conditioned the Lunarians to see the gems as objects.
Mm-hmm.
By saying, look at these beautiful colors, we are going to make these into jewelry, we are going to make these into dust to decorate the planet. Rather than saying, these are our enemies that we have destroyed because we are at war. So, you know, and the Lunarians treat the gems that way too. They're like, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, look at this beautiful little lady. Oh, whoops, that wasn't right.
I wouldn't say they objectify them after some time.
After some time, some of them stop objectifying them. I think Cicada is, you know, a nice person. I think that those two, like, attendants that are in their little mansion, they are nice. Like, that's what I'm getting at, is that I think the Lunarians, in general, are shown to be pretty solid. You know, they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
Once they get to know you, you know, they're perfectly capable of forming friendships and connections with the gems. It's just that when they first meet them, you know, their thing is like, oh, beautiful colors. These gem people, they're like this exotic.
Would be my first reaction too, probably.
Well, especially if that's the only thing you know about them,
Mm-hmm.
is the thing. Like,
That's true, I agree with you.
There are two different narratives that they could have been told. They could have been told, these are our enemies, and we have to destroy them because we are at war. Or they can say what they have been told, which is, these are things. They are beautiful. We're going to make jewelry out of them.
But, you know, when it comes to Phos, like, when we have this human theory... Because, you know, Phos is already a human. Like, they have the shell legs.
Yeah.
The eye.
Mm-hmm.
So they're basically, I don't know, human hybrids.
Yeah, well, and that connects to what happens in future volumes.
Well, I was also going to say, it's interesting that you bring up Phos's kindness as sort of their defining factor when they were entirely Phosphophyllite, right? Where they were entirely soft, like physically soft. And then through physically changing and hardening from other elements, that worldview and that the cynicism and the questioning of the status quo is represented through them literally becoming more hard over the course of the series, because they are literally not made of this Moss 3.5 hardness.
And incidentally also taking on physically more visually masculine traits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, this was not about future volumes or something. I was just, I always had the question, okay, if you start mixing this together, because, you know, Phos is a mix, you know, what's going to happen? I always had that question on my mind. Mm-hmm. And I want to see what the series is doing with that.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's the case, that there is this idea that Phos is the closest thing to human that currently exists in this world. And where that goes, we shall find out.
Exactly. But this has been a wonderful discussion. Unless there's anything particular, I think we should get into questions, because we have been talking about this series.
We have been talking for 2.5 hours.
Exactly. And
good luck editing, G. Let's answer questions. They're pretty simple questions this time, luckily.
I think Whimsy Dear has asked our favorite 3 gems.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So
my 3 favorite gems. Well, do you want to start, Tails?
Well, I'm going with Phos because I think they're a really great protagonist. Then Pat Paracha, I don't know why, maybe it's the hair, and maybe I'm a simple person who likes cool hair.
Big fluffy hair.
Yeah.
It's not fluffy.
Valid.
There are so many great characters to choose from. I don't know, you go first. Or you go. I have to think.
Well, I love Phos as well. I love Cinnabar, which is obvious from all of the screen caps I was taking with Cinnabar specifically. And then, the third one's like the hardest, because there's so many I like. I guess Karen Gorm interests me the most.
Oh my god.
But I think that... I don't know about like.
Yeah.
Antarcticite is probably the one that I like the most. I think they're really cute. I like those kind of tsundere, you know, very serious, but secretly a big softie kind of characters. So. They're cute. I guess, you know, I like Phos, and I like the characters that I am most able to ship with Phos.
All great picks, and absolutely agree 100. And that's the problem with like such a large cast. There's so many good characters. I would agree that like Phos is my favorite. I do think Phos is like such a compelling character.
Yeah,
and they've gone through so much, and they're watching their whole evolution of character is really fascinating. I would also say that like I really like Rutile. I think Rutile is like such a interesting. But they're also in like such a unique position within this this Lustrous society. They are really the only quote unquote healer of this group, and so they very intimately understand like the entirety of these gems. Plus, also the like yearning for their partner with Podparacha, and that hopelessness that they just continue to keep working towards trying to keep their partner with them. is just really
I think Ichikawa Sensei also said that Rutiel was one of her favorites.
And as a character, they really stand out just purely because of their being in a different position than a lot of the other Lustrous, right? And currently, I mean, I love Antarctite. I think they are phenomenal. I love everything about that whole story arc. I think it's very it just adds so much to Phos's character. But I also currently, with all of the mess that's going on right now currently in the manga, and we'd seen like shadows of it prior to current chapters, but Yellow Diamond has like been going through it, and and the amount of responsibility that they feel as just someone who's continued to be the survivor in terrible situations has obviously really played a huge role in their current mentality, and I find I want to see how their story arc plays out, and I think it's being handled really well currently by Ichikawa. But yeah, like it's so hard to choose because all of them are really wonderful. Cinnabar, of course, as well, and Diamond as well. Just there's so many good characters.
Diamond is so cute.
Yeah, Diamond. I feel there's such a darkness like underneath all the sweetness with them that is interesting. I want them to have like a nice heart-to-heart with Bort. I don't know if Bort would be receptive, but
I also feel like super bad for Jade, who's like in charge of like keeping all those rascals not dead. I wouldn't.
I feel bad for you, Clace, as well.
Yeah.
I like them too.
Yeah, I like them. Yeah, I like everybody.
maybe my third pick would
like
be Alexandrite.
Yeah, she's cool.
Yeah.
They're cool. Oh my god.
Yeah, we're making the mistakes all the time.
Yeah, we're making such terrible... They're rocks!
Rocks have no gender.
We had like he, she, they...
And that's sort of the complexity. Again, we talked about the difficulty of translating this to other languages with gendered languages. It's just, unfortunately, especially since the manga does kind of, as you pointed out in your reread, Ray, about like how the translator wanted to kind of avoid using singular they until they were kind of like strong-armed into it.
Volume 10.
I just want to say that the German version was
they, them.
so upfront about it right from the start. Like, they're genderless, we need to do something about that. And the German version was very, very upfront, so, yeah.
And I do think that it's something that we'll see more and more of becoming normalized. Like another good example currently with the perfect editions of Soul Eater, translating Krona's pronouns as they, them, which wasn't the case when
mysteries of my childhood.
Yeah.
I guess he, him is the closest we have to a gender neutral.
Yeah, like I remember reading it, it blew my head away.
Yeah.
Like.
and so we are seeing more and more of they them singular pronoun being used, which is a very like wonderful, right? Like I think we all agree that that's great. But it is something that, people have to adjust to, and you will mess up, you will make mistakes, but it's with the best intention of, just so long as you keep going and try to do better. And with these sentient rocks, it's, we talked about how they're presented, like the gender presentation of them, so it is easy to slip into things. Plus,
isn't it interesting that this is like related but different.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it interesting that the first gem that we see fully in the nude with the very masculine chest is Cairngorm?
Mm. Yeah. And again, it's just that performance of gender.
Yeah. I was definitely, like, I was thinking about that. Because I think Tails had mentioned, like, that, you know, somebody was, when they were embarrassed because they were naked, they, like, covered their chest.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
As that being sort of a feminine gendering. Which I did notice, but it's like I was paying attention to also, like, the interview where Ichikawa was like, I drew them with the idea of, like, a male upper half and a female lower half in mind. I was, like, I guess paying attention for that while I was reading. And yeah, the first character who we get, like, you know, a full, I guess, full nude is Cairngorm, like, putting the white powder on their skin. And they're also, you know, the one who's being forced to wear all of these beautiful dresses and bras and shit. It's like, why are you wearing a bra? I mean, you can wear a bra if you want to, but I don't know why you want to. You don't know what a bra is.
Yeah, I thought it was weird.
Yeah, if you like bras, that's fine, you know, but kind of feels like nothing you're doing is your own choice, baby.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it. But yeah. Anyway, what's the next question?
We'll do Olive's question, which is sort of related to Whimsy's question. And Olive asks, at all of the manga, has your favorite character shifted at all during the series?
Yes.
Yes.
I think yes.
My favorite character is Phos.
Yeah.
A lot.
Cinnabar has changed surprisingly little. But they have friends now, which is nice. They're friends with Bort. That's cute.
But our favorite character has literally shifted a whole bunch in the series. Very physically changed. Yeah, I think, and that, again, that's purposeful. It's hard to like Phos in the beginning. They're very, they're young, so they're entitled. They, you know, don't keep shirking their duties. They're not unlikable, but comparatively to some of the other characters.
I was going to say, I like them a lot.
But comparatively to some
I think they're really funny.
That is true. And that's not to say that when I read it, I disliked Phos, but I do think that some of the other, like, it's very easy to attach yourselves to other characters early on, because there's, I mean, Cinnabar's really, like, interesting, and it seems set up like Cinnabar's will be a larger slice of, or component of the series, but then Phos, as they should, you know, is as the protagonist, it makes up the majority of the story, but becomes more interesting and more, like, there's just more to them that you can attach yourself to and become interested in over the course of the series.
So I just looked it up. There is an Italian translation of the manga, but there is no no reading, like, where I could check out how they handled the
pronouns and stuff. What were Takuto's questions?
So Takuto has 4 questions. The first being favorite volume cover.
Yeah. Lightning round.
Favorite volume cover.
So my favorite one is the one with Lapis Lazuli holding Phos head. I think it's cover 7.
Yeah, and honestly, that's my favorite as well. I think that's a really evocative image of this.
Yeah, I like that one too. I like looking at 10 because there's so many details. So.
Well, 10's...
I was just looking at it. Like,
10...
It's like a Where's Waldo?
10's the wedding, or, well, yeah. for the most part. It's
You just burst out laughing every time we mention.
I'm sorry. Like, so horrible.
I mean, Volume 7 is very, like, it's just, yeah, it's beautiful. It's thematic. It's very much a changing of the guard, as it were, for the series. And it kind of hits you like a ton of bricks when you can see it on the cover of, like, how much the status quo has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Ichikawa's artwork is beautiful. As someone who owns the art book for her works, they're just, everything is stunning. It's so beautiful.
I need it.
It is so good.
What's the second question?
Next question is thoughts on the direction taken in Volume 8, the twist, which I think we've...
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. I am riveted.
The Lunarian reveal is just something that was handled really well, and again brings in this complexity that you lose if it's just the like us versus them narrative. I don't know. It's just really, really good. I love it.
It also just feels like a natural progression. Like,
yes.
Of course, Phos would be like, "There's no answers here, so I guess I have to go there."
Mm-hmm.
So,
well. It was like, I always wanted to know, the Lunarians, when you first see them, are presented as not really, sentient, I would say, this like weird Buddhist-themed, things, I will call them, attacking you for no apparent reason and turning you into jewelry and weapons, from what we know first. And then when you actually visit them and you ask them, oh, hey, why don't you attack during the night there? And the princess is waiting. Yeah, the labor union would complain about that. Like, this is one of the funniest twists I've ever read in any media. Like, I was like, okay, give Ichikawa all the awards you could give her.
What's with all the Buddhist shit? And he's like, well, we thought Kongo-sensei would respond if we looked like the chapels he was designed after. And then he like immediately shifts into like his suit and his glasses. Yeah, it's great. And also like I kind of knew it was heading in that direction since Phos was trying to like communicate with them and like first got that one and was like, talk to me, can't you talk? And the color like comes into its eyes and it just goes
Yeah, I thought they might be controlled on their own planet to amass wealth or something. That's a prediction I had. It's like they were turned into the beings without conscience to attack others and gain resources, but it was just the labor union.
Well, it was because it's hard for them to breathe the atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
Because it gives them so many memories.
Yeah. We all enjoyed the twist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next question is, do you prefer Alexandrite Phos or Phos's... not Alexandrite, but...
like lapis lazuli Phos?
Yeah, I think that's what he means. Do you prefer Lapis Phos or Phos's original face more?
Like, in terms of appearance? They have the same face.
Yeah, I was just like, yeah.
I mean, they have different hair. Do you like
I like their hair better when they... Yeah, I like the blue hair better than the green hair, I guess.
I mean...
I like that bowl cut. It's cute.
I like Phos's first face, quote-unquote, because it had the goofy expressions. More the goofiness, so I would have to go with Phos. Yeah.
The expression
I just want them to be happy.
Yeah, right.
So maybe I prefer when they were happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's something truly unsettling when we talk about losing your head and having it physically replaced with somebody else's. I feel like Phos as a character is more so Phos with their original head versus having Lapis's. But yeah, I mean, it's if this series.
I also think like their Lunarian pearl eye is so creepy.
Oh yeah, it is
because they can't close it, and they're just like they just appear in the darkness to people with this one glowing eye, and it's just like it's horrible Frankenstein's monster approaching me.
Isn't that something we can tie back to the series? But we can't talk about the series anymore. We need to
We need to go.
Last question from Takuto is, how many more volumes do you think we'll get before it concludes? Yeah, the series is on hiatus now.
Doesn't she have, like, health issues?
It is,
too?
yeah.
I think so. But I can see the series hitting, like, I don't know, 15, 17 volumes. We're at 12 already.
Personally, I don't think it's going to go that much longer.
No.
I could see maybe 15.
Yeah.
But 14-ish. 13, 14.
It's certainly not a series that's going to hit, like, 20, 25. We're in the end game, right?
No.
Like,
Yes.
I do think so.
I think it'll be more volumes if they're going for a happy ending, and less volumes if they're not.
And we all have the suspicion that they're not, so it's probably...
They're not!
It's probably safer to err on the side of caution. But yes, as always, thank you so much everyone who sent in your questions. We really appreciate them. And thank you so much, Tails, for guesting on this month's podcast. We're so happy to have you, and I hope you enjoyed your time here.
Thanks for having me. I had a blast.
I think we got some really good discussion out of that.
Yes.
I mean, obviously we went on for 3 hours. So. Yeah, I definitely appreciated having your input, and we are both very grateful to have you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Next month, for regular listeners, our theme is going to be Josei titles. Some of our favorite series, some stuff that's, I'm sure, completed, some stuff that's new. And it is February, so I'm sure we will have a focus on romance. But of course, like with every demographic, Josei is not just one genre, it's a whole bunch of different genres. So I think we will be talking about the breadth of them as well. So as always, send in your questions once I post on Twitter, or leave them in the comments below, because we love answering your questions if given the opportunity.
Yes. We also love engagement.
Yeah. Shh! Don't tell them that, Ray! They're not supposed to realize.
Like, subscribe, and ring that bell.
But once again,
smash that like button.
But once again, thank you so much, Tails, for joining us this discussion, for joining us in our first podcast of the new year as well.
Ooh, yeah.
I hope everyone is having a better, or if not better, at least a more productive 2021 than they were last year. Staying safe, staying healthy, and I am, as always, Simply G. I will see you in the next video. Bye till then, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Eat the rich.